On the first afternoon when I was speaking, I made a very brief reference to 1933, the banking crisis in the United States, and how FDR recognized that this was not a problem that could be solved within the traditional framework of economic theory and policy, that this was a problem that reflected the relationship between the economy and the society. And so the strategy he chose, though it was supplemented by many sound economic measures, he fundamentally went to the social and political roots of the banking crisis. Many of you will recall in 1978, a mini crisis of that type hit Chrysler Corporation. That was the time when Lee Iacocca took over. He had been president of Ford. And within 3 years, Chrysler lost $3.3 billion, which sounds like chicken feed today, but it was more money than any corporation in the history of the world had lost up until that time. All of the prognosis on Wall Street was that within 6 months maximum, Chrysler would be bankrupt. This was the time when the Japanese onslaught was the quality, small cars, fuel-efficient cars. It was already the second oil crisis. Prices were skyrocketing. Inflation was there. Quality of the American cars was quite low, and Chrysler was the last on the list. And it was generally believed, all the experts on Wall Street predicted that this company will fold. At that time, I had an opportunity to do an unsolicited study of Chrysler, and I wrote to Iacocca, and I said, certainly all the experts are correct. Chrysler can fold because any company can collapse if it follows the wrong policies, but that's not necessary. Chrysler has enormous underutilized capacities. If Chrysler uses all those capacities, in fact, it could emerge much stronger than before. In the next 3 years, Chrysler earned a net profit of $3.3 billion. I don't know if they did that on purpose, if you can do that on purpose, because it was so poetically symmetrical. More money than the company had earned in the previous 59 years since it was founded by Walter Kroll. Economy in a wider context. What is that wider context? I'm going to make just 9 points. A number of them have been mentioned in one sense or another. My first is the premise that the society that we're trying to study and be scientific about is a complex, conscious, integrated living organism undergoing a continuous process of evolution. It's not a mechanism, it's not a machine, and I think Robert's 2 conceptual systems really brought out that very well, so I don't need to go into it. But I would like to emphasize the term integrated and living. Best analogy for this is the human. I was going to say human body, but then we tend to think of only the physicality of the body. But as Stefan can very well tell us, a very large percentage of our human physiology and the functioning of the body depends on our thinking and our emotions as well. So we really have to think of it as the human being. And that's what we're talking about in economy and in society. This is a conscious, thinking, living, emotional being that's also acting. And the kind of integration I mean is, if you really look at the human body, in medicine we learn that you've got a metabolic system, a circulatory system, a respiratory system, a nervous system, a lymphatic system, and everything. Go into the human body. You only need one course in anatomy to know when you go into the human body. Those systems are abstract conceptions. The body is an integrated whole. No system exists in isolation from the others. They are all fully integrated with each other. And I think that's the truth within economy, but much more so when we look at economy in the wider context of society. So this is the first point. The second, Karl Popper once said with reference to the social sciences, beware of misguided naturalism in the social sciences. Beware of trying to apply the principles that worked in natural science, the formulations, the mathematical analysis, the immutable universal rules, to a science related to conscious human beings. He also meant by that, and elaborated on it, beware of an effort to try to create a value-free science in which the scientist is objectively detached from the field of study. There is no value-free human science. We are either supporting the values that are implicitly there in the society, or we're working to realize values that are not there. And I'm arguing that this needs to be made explicit. I've mentioned it already, so I'm just repeating that human science, economic science, has to be value-based. We have to evaluate it in terms of how effectively it's addressing the needs, aspirations, welfare, and well-being of human beings in a sustainable way. And if it's not doing that, it doesn't matter how valid the formulas appear or how good the math appears in itself. It's a failure as a social science. I raised the point yesterday in one of my comments, and others have also done it, that if we look at economy, its purpose is to serve society. If we look at any component of the economy, like financial systems, financial markets, the only valid legitimacy for them is how well they serve the economy that's supposed to serve the society. And if they're developing in other directions, it doesn't matter what our formulations and our algorithms say. We have an aberration, we have a disease, we have a cancer. It doesn't matter how good the math is. 2 Nobel Prizes have been given for scientists who developed computerized algorithms which were the basis for financial crises. The Nobel Committee thought they were worthy of prizes. I thought it's a good justification for dissolving the Nobel Committee because they're perpetuating idiocy and they're a threat to humanity today. The third point is, it's been mentioned already, Robert also, that we've got to think of social science, I didn't say economy, not only economy, in an evolutionary sense. And what do we mean by that? That term is used in many different ways today. What I mean by that is, human beings as a society are evolving. We have aspirations that are growing, our awareness is widening, our knowledge is growing, our capacity for organization is increasing in complexity. The values we're seeking to fulfill, we all seek greater freedom, greater capacity for accomplishment, greater interaction, greater innovation, greater creativity and individuality. And our social science has to reflect these fundamental aspirations and show us how to realize them more effectively. This point is all covered, but I think it's important that just to note it again, that I'm talking about economy as an open system that's interacting and mutually interdependent with all the other major dimensions of society. Minister Silva mentioned it in his morning. He said he started his speech on the Wednesday morning by saying he's going to look at the economic, political, and social implications of economics. And that's, I'm just broadening it to, he didn't specifically mention ecology, though I'm sure he would have agreed with it. I'm just broadening it to be more comprehensive. We can use the word multidisciplinary for this or interdisciplinary, but when I use the word transdisciplinary, I'm talking about something a little different. I'm trying to talk about what is common to all of the social sciences. What is their foundation, which they have in common? Because after all, whether we're working politically, economically, socially, technologically, or in any other field, we are human beings who go through certain processes to relate to each other, organize our life, and accomplish. Robert and others have spoken to some of the fundamental principles of systems theory, self-organization, emergence, and network, which is a good example, I think, of transdisciplinary principles. But they're not the only ones. There are others, and I think part of the job of trying to reconceptualize economic or social theory is to really look more carefully at what are the underlying social processes that are applicable. We have an investigation going on in the World Academy on this, on the search for a transdisciplinary science of society. I'm only going to mention one of them, which I think is so central, and I've called it here Humancentered, human energy conversion. But in order to do that, I'm going to go to the next topic, which again, I was very happy to see that the minister felt this was so important to the issue of economy that he put it right on the table in his opening remarks, and that is social power. If we look at society as a living organism, it has energy, it has capacity. That capacity is growing. That capacity gets expressed in achieving results. Are we tapping the full potential that the society has? What can we do that will bring out more of the energy, more of the creativity, utilize more of the capacities? To me, that's the fundamental challenge of economics, is how to do that, how to engage. That's the challenge as a management consultant when I go into a company. The answer doesn't lie in the financial statements. It doesn't lie with the financial assets. It lies with the society and its energy and potential and the human beings within it and the organization that it's using. And very importantly, how the power in the society is being utilized. And I think our theory has to be very explicit about how power is being utilized today to whose benefit. I think I have three more, and I'll go quickly on these. These are all, like Juanilio, these are all very big topics for long discussion, hours each, but I just want to put them on the table for further discussion. One is, our social science has tended to become so objective, so objectivized in pursuit of something akin to what's done in the natural sciences. But we're dealing with conscious human beings. My FDR story was trying to illustrate that the reality of economy, the real reality is at least equally a subjective reality. That's our aspirations. In 2008, overnight or in a few months, $4 trillion or $7 trillion in wealth disappeared. We didn't lose our factories. We didn't have earthquakes that did that. Just because of a change in the subjective perception of the world of society about what was going on. So we can't ignore this. But I'm going to say something a little more controversial, because it's one thing to concede that the subjective dimensions are important. It's another thing to say that it's the real driver of the whole process of economic development. Harlan Cleveland, who was our president of the World Academy in the 90s, he was a former Assistant Secretary of State under Kennedy. In the 50s, he was in this Far East, and he saw something that he didn't understand, and he said, there's a revolution of rising expectations going on that's going to change and transform Korea and Taiwan and other countries and Japan in the time. He understood that the basis for rapid social or economic progress really starts with the roots in the subjective attitudes of individuals and the country as a whole. This one is maybe more difficult to. In the natural sciences, we deal with individual as the individual single element, like a quark or a meson or a cell or an atom or a molecule. But in society, we're dealing with unique individuals. Partly we have things in common, but partly we have unique conscious choice. So I wrote an article to illustrate this a few years ago called Steve Jobs Nobel Laureate. Just to illustrate the point that one man, and I'm not trying to make him a saint or anything like that, but just as an illustration, because the example, one person, by perceiving social needs that others hadn't perceived, and by perceiving creatively ways to meet those needs, one man not only created the most valuable company in the history of the world, but changed the world. And can we ignore in economic theory that the real catalytic action for creativity and evolution starts with individuals? And what does our theory say about the potential for the future if we learn how to tap that individual energy more effectively? So finally, we have been using in our NET group the phrase human-centered economics, and I just wanted to clarify what that means to me. That the development and creative expression of human aspirations, energies, and capacities, individual and collective, is the real driving force and ultimate determinant of the direction and character of economic development.